My husband and Mil abandoned me while I was giving birth, so I took back the house and money. Rachel Thompson had always been the picture of quiet strength in Middleton, a town where news traveled fast and reputations stuck like glue. She was the devoted wife, the caring mother, the steady employee at the local bookstore who knew every regular by name. At 32, her life seemed simple and predictable to the casual observer, stable, even enviable. But beneath the surface, a silent struggle leaked through every forced smile and careful word, one that no one in the neighborhood saw until it was far too late. The house they lived in was modest but warm, filled with the soft hum of lullabies and the scent of fresh laundry. It was a house Rachel had fought hard for, contributing every paycheck, every saved penny toward its upkeep and the mortgage. Greg, her husband, rarely bothered with the house beyond occasional grumbles about bills. Margaret, Greg's mother, lived just down the street and wielded an influence over the family that simmered beneath polite smiles and controlled conversations. From the beginning, Greg and Margaret had subtly edged Rachel out of decisions. The finances were strictly under their control, with Greg quietly dismissing Rachel's suggestions by labeling them unrealistic or overly cautious. Margaret rarely missed a chance to belittle Rachel's ambitions, nipping at her self-esteem with offhand comments about her humble upbringing and supposed lack of sophistication. It wasn't outright cruelty, more like a constant erosion of confidence, a persistent reminder that Rachel was never quite enough. Every time Rachel brought up a concern, Greg's eyes would glaze over, and Margaret's thin smile would speak volumes. "You wouldn't understand," they'd say together, as if Rachel's input was an inconvenience in their carefully ordered lives. The sharpest cut came on the day Rachel went into labor. The morning started quietly, with only the soft morning light spilling through the curtains. The baby was due at any moment, a joyous, scary milestone Rachel both craved and feared. Greg had promised to be by her side, holding her hand, whispering reassurances like he had for months. Margaret had agreed to keep the house running while Rachel focused on welcoming their child. But when the contractions began intensifying and the midwife hadn't yet arrived, only a nervous, unfamiliar babysitter sat quietly in the living room. Greg had been called several times, but stayed silent, unwilling to break the tension. Margaret offered a curt excuse and left, promising to return soon. She didn't. Hours passed, with mounting pain and panic. Rachel's heart raced with every wave of contractions, but what weighed heavier was the crushing realization that the two people who should have been her anchors had vanished. She was utterly alone, staring down the most vulnerable moment of her life without the support she had been promised. When the ambulance finally arrived, Rachel was half crazed with pain and fear. Wrapped in a hospital gown, tears streaking down her face, she was wheeled into the emergency room, clutching her belly. The nurses whispered soft encouragements, but Rachel's eyes scanned the waiting room over and over, hoping, praying to see Greg or Margaret. Neither appeared. Word spread quickly through Middleton. Whispered questions, exchanged looks, pitying glances followed her everywhere. The woman who had once been a pillar of quiet strength was now a figure of whispered sorrow. Her abandonment wasn't lost in private. It became known, almost shouted, as if the town's judgment were a heavy curtain closing around her. Rachel's humiliation wasn't something she could hide, and the shock was just beginning to settle in. She lay in that hospital bed, cradling a newborn who deserved love and protection, wondering how the people she once trusted could let her down so fundamentally. The betrayal bit deep. It wasn't just about being left alone during childbirth. It was about how Greg and Margaret had viewed her all along as less than a partner, less than worthy of respect. Yet somewhere beneath the broken pieces, a flicker of something else stirred, a determination she didn't know she had. But for now, all Rachel could feel was the sting of abandonment, as the silence left by Greg and Margaret screamed louder than any cries in that hospital room. The days that followed Rachel's lonely delivery were heavier than the labor pains she had endured. As she sat in the hospital, cradling her fragile newborn, The absence of Greg and Margaret was no longer just physical. It became a suffocating weight on her spirit. The town's whispers followed her like shadows. She could feel the stairs peeling away at the facade she had maintained for years, exposing raw nerves beneath. Greg and Margaret emerged from their silence, but not as Rachel had hoped. Instead of rushing to her side, they took center stage in the town's narrative, casting themselves as the aggrieved parties in this fractured family. Their carefully choreographed appearances weren't about welcoming the new life or supporting a young mother. They were performances designed to undermine Rachel's credibility. At a gathering in the church hall, their voices rose over murmurs, telling legal friends and neighbors that Rachel was unstable, too fragile to care for the baby properly. Greg's eyes, once indifferent, now shone with false concern, while Margaret's lips curled in practiced sympathy. "She's been overwhelmed," Margaret confided to sympathetic ear. "Can't handle the pressure of motherhood," Greg added, as if Rachel's strength, or lack thereof, was up for debate. The venom wrapped itself in familiar phrases, finding its home even among people who'd known Rachel all her life. Some neighbors exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. "Poor Rachel," they murmured, "she's struggling." But underlying the pity was a question. Was she really the fragile woman they were told she was? Undermined and isolated, Rachel felt the walls close in tighter. Small kindnesses from nursing staff and a few close friends did little to counterbalance the weight of social rejection. Every whispered comment, every lingering gaze, chipped away at a core she hadn't realized was so fragile until it cracked. She found herself doubting not only Greg and Margaret's narratives, but her very own memories. Had she been naive? Had her hope for partnership blinded her to the truth of their treatment? The question teetered in her mind, painful and relentless. But the sharpest wound lay deeper. The voice that berated her the most was her own. Echoed by the silence of the house that had once been a home, memories of Greg's dismissive smirks and Margaret's cold critiques played like a cruel soundtrack. "You're not enough," they whispered in her ears, reminding her why she'd never challenged them before. Now that silence was deafening. Rachel's sister Samantha called often, her voice a balm in the storm. "You're not alone, Rachel. We'll find a way through this," she promised gently. Yet, even Samantha's warmth couldn't erase the looming doubts seeded with such cruelty. As the days dragged on, Greg and Margaret's campaign escalated. Official letters arrived, legal notices threatening eviction, claims questioning Rachel's capability as a mother surfacing before child protective agencies. Each one was a calculated move to strip away what Rachel had built with sweat and tears: her home, her dignity, her child. What hurt most was watching people she once thought friends accept the gossip, turning polite nods onto cold shoulders. The community's silent judgment was a cage forged with half-truths and malice. Rachel's heart broke not just for the baby she held, but for the woman she saw reflected in weary hospital mirrors. A woman who had given everything and received betrayal in return. Yet, even amidst the despair, a tiny ember flickered, a seed of resistance anchored deep in her soul. She thought of other women, others like her, who had been dismissed, overlooked, pushed to the edges. Her pain transformed into quiet resolve. If she could find the strength to stand amidst this storm, maybe others could too. For now, though, the path ahead looked treacherous, and the shadows of Greg and Margaret's deceit darkened every step. If you've ever faced a moment when the people you counted on turned their backs, you know the darkness that follows. But sometimes, that darkness lights a fire within, one that refuses to be extinguished. Rachel's story was just beginning to unfold. Rachel returned home under a cloud heavier than the stormy skies that met her at the hospital exit. The house stood quiet, but not with the warmth she remembered. Instead, it carried an oppressive stillness, a hollow reminder of what she had lost. Her newborn's soft coos filled the space, a small beacon amid the lingering cold. Yet every corner echoed with the absence of Greg and Margaret, the very people she had once called family. Determined not to break, Rachel dived headfirst into the overwhelming chaos. She dug for bills and legal notices, trying to piece together the complex web Greg and Margaret had woven around her. Late nights blended into early mornings as she navigated calls to insurance companies, child welfare offices, and even local authorities, often met with bureaucratic indifference or veiled skepticism. One clerk, after a perfunctory glance at her case file, offered a strained apology, sighing, "These situations are complicated. Sometimes it's best to let things settle first." Small setbacks mounted, a missed deadline here, a misunderstanding there, each one a heavy weight dragging her deeper into despair. Her phone vibrated incessantly, with chilling messages from Greg's lawyer, threatening eviction and custody changes. The sense of invasion was suffocating. Rachel felt her dignity slipping, stolen piece by piece in the glare of cold legal lights. But amid the turmoil, a faint light flickered. Samantha's voice was her lifeline, steady, unwavering. "You're stronger than you realize, Rachel. This isn't the end." Samantha's investment went beyond words. She arrived on Rachel's doorstep one evening, bringing a stack of files, journals, and unwavering belief. "We need to find proof, anything that shows the truth about the house and your financial contributions," Samantha insisted. "It's your right." Rachel grasped the idea hungrily. Together they uncovered old bank statements, pay stubs, and receipts, every piece a quiet testament to Rachel's relentless commitment. The documents painted a picture that clashed starkly with the narrative Greg and Margaret had fed the town. It was a tangible reminder that what they tried to erase was written in black and white by her own relentless toil. Still, the clock twisted mercilessly. Rachel found herself in countless meetings, wrestling with her emotions as legal jargon swirled around her. Amid the court dates and administrative offices, she found moments of crushing loneliness, when even her reflection seemed a stranger. Panic gnawed at the edges of her mind during nights when the baby cried endlessly, and Rachel felt too broken to soothe. Yet there were glimpses of hope. Michael, the local attorney known for his quiet integrity, agreed to listen after Samantha shared Rachel's story. His calm manner, mixed with purposeful questions, gave her a sliver of faith. "We'll build your case," he said with a firmness that steadied her shaking hands. "It's not over." In between the battles, Rachel began jotting down her feelings in a journal, a silent witness to her pain and bravery. Each entry unwound knots of fear, threading moments of defiance and hope. The act of writing reminded her that she still had a voice, and it is growing stronger. Despite the progress, Rachel's heart faltered with every public appearance of Greg and Margaret. They paraded their twisted version of events with a cruel spotlight, their faces masks of innocent concern that sickened Rachel. The community's skepticism weighed heavily. Whispers trailed her every move. The shame of being doubted, especially by those she had called friends, festered like an open wound. Still, Rachel refused to let despair consume her. Her child looked up at her with trusting eyes, unknowing but needy, and that fragile connection fueled an unyielding will. This wasn't the surrender her story deserved. Beneath every obstacle and every cold rejection, Rachel's spirit hardened, preparing for the fight to claim back what was hers by right: her home, her child, her life. And in the quiet moments before dawn, when the world finally seemed still, Rachel would whisper to herself, "This is not where my story ends." The situation worsened in ways Rachel never anticipated. One gray morning, she received a summons that felt like a blow to the chest. An emergency hearing had been scheduled to decide custody of her newborn, and the fate of the house she had fought so hard to keep. The legal papers Greg's lawyer had sent, once merely a shadow over her days, had become a hammer poised to shatter the fragile life she was trying to rebuild. Greg and Margaret arrived at the hearing fully prepared, their faces masks of feigned compassion and concern. The courtroom was filled with neighbors, many whispering and casting furtive glances toward Rachel. Some wore expressions of doubt, others a mix of pity and judgment. The weight of the community's eyes bore down on her like a storm. Greg spoke first, outlining accusations of neglect and instability. while Margaret chimed in with tales of Rachel's supposed emotional breakdown during labor, an exaggerated, twisted version of what had really happened. Their words painted Rachel as unfit, spinning a web to justify their control over the family's assets, and most cruelly, the child's custody. Rachel sat frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Every accusation felt like a fresh wound. The cold, clinical atmosphere of the courtroom swallowed her small voice as she tried to answer questions, her nerves unraveling beneath the harsh scrutiny. Some of the judge's expressions seemed skeptical, others sympathetic, but the doubt in the eyes of those she had once considered friends stung the most. Margaret, in particular, seemed to relish the occasion. Her thin lips curled into a triumphant smile whenever she made a point, as if savoring the power she wielded over Rachel's fate. Greg's steely gaze never left Rachel, a silent reminder of his betrayal that cut deeper than any word. The hearing dragged on, exposing Rachel to humiliating cross-examination and invasive scrutiny. The attorneys questioned her ability to handle motherhood, insinuating that her past hardships meant she was unprepared for the responsibilities ahead. Rachel's voice cracked as she recounted the darkest hours of her labor alone, her pain weaponized against her. Outside the courtroom, the harsh reality of Greg and Margaret's social maneuvering revealed itself. Flyers and whispered rumors circulated, casting her as an unstable mother undeserving of her child. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed an inhospitable place, burdened by the threats to eviction and loss. That night, Rachel sat in the dim light of her living room, the baby asleep in her arms, feeling utterly broken. The walls closed in, the cold creeping into her bones. She doubted whether she could withstand the relentless assault against her dignity and rights. In the midst of despair, Samantha's voice echoed through a crackling phone line. "Don't give in, Rachel. You're stronger than they'll ever be." Her sister's unwavering support was the only balm on the raw wounds inflicted by Greg and Margaret's cruelty. As the hearing loomed, Rachel's sense of isolation intensified. She was pushed to the edge, weighed down by unfair accusations and the community's growing judgment. Even small victories felt hollow in comparison to the relentless tide of opposition. But beneath the crushing weight of shame and betrayal, a fierce determination began to blaze. Rachel refused to be defined or destroyed by the lies and manipulations thrown at her. Somewhere deep within, the fire of resilience took hold. The very abyss she stood over was beginning to fuel her will to fight back. At the end of the day, as the shadows lengthened and the silence settled heavy around the house, Rachel knew she faced her darkest hour. Yet she also understood that the coming days could mark a turning point. The fight for her child, her home, and her dignity was far from over. If you've ever felt powerless against those who bend truth for their own gain, remember that even in the darkest depths, a single spark can ignite a fire that changes everything. Rachel's journey was about to reveal the strength hiding behind humiliation and despair. The days that followed were a whirlwind of retreat and reflection for Mia. She found herself wandering the dimly lit corridors of the cafe, her footsteps hollow echoes in a space that once felt like a home. The patrons, once warm and familiar, now cast curt glances or whispered behind her back. The weight of the public scorn and the relentless whispers gnawed at her spirit. Each morning when she pushed open the door, she prepared herself for another wave of judgment. Yet here and there, amidst the shadows, flickers of kindness quietly emerged. One such beacon was Sarah, the quiet barista who had waked alongside Mia for months, but rarely exchanged more than pleasantries. Today, however, as Mia wiped down a counter, Sarah lingered nearby until she dared a tentative approach. "Hey," Sarah murmured, voice barely above a whisper but sincere. "If you ever want to talk or just need a break, I'm around." Mia offered a tired but grateful smile, feeling a small seed of hope take root inside. Outside work, Mia's nights were restless. The silence at home pressed down like a stone, the sting of humiliation replaying relentlessly in her mind. Yet one evening, as she scrolled through messages on her phone, she found a thread she'd overlooked. An email from an old college professor with a brief note of encouragement and an invitation to reconnect. The professor reminded her of the strength and intelligence she'd shown during her studies, encouraging her not to be defined by a single moment or the harsh judgments of others. This unexpected message sparked something deep within Mia, a faint but persistent reminder of her worth beyond the misunderstanding that had shattered her world. She began revisiting memories of past challenges she had overcome, moments where resilience had carried her through. Slowly, she realized the confrontation she endured, while brutal, was a chapter, not the whole story. Yet, navigating this path was still treacherous. At the cafe, the latest rumor spread like wildfire. A mistaken accusation about the incident's cause, twisted into damaging lies that painted Mia as untrustworthy. Her customers' numbers dwindled. Fingers pointed covertly as she passed by. She found herself slipping into moments of despair, questioning whether she had the strength left to reclaim her dignity. Still, Mia clung to the glimmers of support she discovered, the quiet words from Sarah, the professor's reminder, even the few loyal patrons who offered an encouraging nod or a smile. These small gestures became faint threads woven into a tapestry of renewed courage. As the weight built to a breaking point, Mia knew she faced a critical crossroad. Remain overwhelmed by the crushing wave of shame and isolation, or summon the courage to confront the tides and seek a new course, one forged from truth and resilience. In this tense moment, the horizon hinted at change, but the path was uncertain and fraught with fear. If you ever find yourself feeling lost in the storm of judgment, remember, rescue can come in the quietest words, the smallest acts of kindness, and the strength to hold on when the night seems endless. Sometimes, the seed of transformation is planted in the soil of our deepest trials. Mia's life took a sudden turn one ordinary afternoon. As she nervously prepared to open the cafe, a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Patel, the cafe's owner, a woman who had remained silent throughout the storm, but whose presence commanded respect. With an intensity Mia hadn't seen before, Mrs. Patel pulled her inside, away from prying eyes. Her voice was firm, yet tinged with regret. "I've been reviewing the situation carefully," she said, holding a folder filled with security footage and witness statements. Something I'd missed before, a video from the back alley showing what really happened the day of that incident. She placed the footage on the small cafe monitor, and Mia watched, frozen in disbelief. The video was unmistakable. It showed a group of teenagers, not Mia, knocking over the display that triggered the whole outcry. Mia had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a jealous coworker had twisted the narrative to deflect blame. The footage captured the truth of her innocence, clear as daylight. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt a rush of vindication bubbling through her chest like warm sunlight after a long winter. Word spread quickly once Mrs. Patel shared the footage with the regular customers and staff meeting. The atmosphere shifted, murmurs replaced whispers, and hesitant apologies surfaced. Liam, the sabotage-minded coworker, was silenced in the face of undeniable evidence. His earlier smug confidence crumbled, replaced by awkward stammering as colleagues began to distance themselves from his bitter resentment. Mia watched their reactions, a mix of relief and sorrow sweeping over her. The betrayal and isolation she'd felt were harsh, but the truth finally pierced through the cloud of lies. It was a turning point. Proof that sometimes justice arrives not through loud proclamations, but through calm, undeniable facts. Yet, this revelation also meant she had to rebuild the trust she'd lost, a task both daunting and deeply necessary. Mrs. Patel pulled Mia aside and said something that resonated deeply. "Your integrity matters more than gossip or mistrust. People will come to see that, one by one, and I'm here to support you through that." In that moment, Mia realized that her strength wasn't just in proving innocence, but in accepting support and standing tall despite the wounds left behind. As the community began to reconcile, a few customers who had previously turned away returned, hesitant but hopeful. The cafe started filling with laughter and shared stories, once again, fragment by fragment, restoring its heartbeat. Mia's confidence, once fragile, began to solidify like stone warmed by the sun. If you ever feel overwhelmed by false accusations or the cruelty of misunderstanding, know that truth has a way of revealing itself, even when it feels buried deep. Hold on to the signs of hope around you. They may seem small, but they carry the power to change everything. Sometimes the greatest victories come silently, through evidence and quiet courage, rather than loud confrontation. With the truth finally unveiled, Mia stepped into a new chapter fueled by a resilience she never knew she possessed. The cafe, once a battleground for whispered accusations and cold shoulders, began to transform into a place of healing and renewed connection. Every cautious smile from returning patrons felt like a tiny victory, each nod of respect from coworkers a balm to her wounded spirit. On her first morning back after the revelation, Mia approached the cafe with a mixture of nerves and determination. The usual clatter of cups and murmur of conversations filled the air, but this time, those sounds carried warmth instead of suspicion. As she placed fresh flowers on the counter, a longtime customer named Mr. Johnson, who had been silent through the ordeal, stopped by. "Mia," he said quietly but firmly, "you've earned back more than just your job. You've earned our trust." That simple affirmation echoed in Mia's heart. It was not merely about clearing her name, but reclaiming her dignity and sense of self-worth. She began organizing small gatherings at the cafe, inviting both old supporters and once skeptical patrons. Through these, she shared her story, not just the pain, but the lessons, the strength found in vulnerability, and the importance of compassion. Slowly, the walls built by fear and doubt started to crumble. Meanwhile, Liam, the coworker who had sparked much of the turmoil, faced the consequences of his actions. The owner confronted him privately, and he was asked to leave the cafe permanently for spreading false accusations and sowing discord among the staff. Without his negativity poisoning the environment, morale improved noticeably. Colleagues who had felt divided now collaborated with renewed enthusiasm. Mia's personal growth was palpable. She no longer dreaded the judgmental stares or whispered gossip, because she understood her own strength and integrity were unshakable foundations. She no longer saw herself as a victim, but as a survivor, one who had faced darkness and emerged into the light. The once painful memories had transformed into chapters of a powerful narrative about courage, truth, and forgiveness. One afternoon, as the sun spilled golden light across the cafe windows, Mia looked around at the bustling room filled with laughter and friendship. It struck her how things had changed, not because she had fought fire with fire, but by embodying grace and resilience. Justice had come not from revenge, but from unwavering truth and the kindness that followed. Mia's journey became a beacon for others who had faced similar trials, proving that even in moments of profound humiliation and heartbreak, one could rise to reclaim dignity and respect. The justice served was not just external, but deeply internal, a healing of the soul. Her story reminds us all that when darkness surrounds us, the light of truth and the courage to stand firm can bring transformation. And sometimes, the greatest triumph is not just in winning a battle, but in reclaiming one's own heart and inspiring others along the way. Mia's life took a sudden turn one ordinary afternoon. As she nervously prepared to open the cafe, a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Patel, the cafe's owner, a woman who had remained silent throughout the storm, but whose presence commanded respect. With an intensity Mia hadn't seen before, Mrs. Patel pulled her inside, away from prying eyes. Her voice was firm, yet tinged with regret. "I've been reviewing the situation carefully," she said, holding a folder filled with security footage and witness statements. "Something I'd missed before. a video from the back alley showing what really happened the day of that incident. She placed the footage on the small cafe monitor, and Mia watched, frozen in disbelief. The video was unmistakable. It showed a group of teenagers, not Mia, knocking over the display that triggered the whole outcry. Mia had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a jealous coworker had twisted the narrative to deflect blame. The footage captured the truth of her innocence, clear as daylight. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt a rush of vindication bubbling through her chest like warm sunlight after a long winter. Word spread quickly once Mrs. Patel shared the footage with the regular customers and staff meeting. The atmosphere shifted, murmurs replaced whispers, and hesitant apologies surfaced. Liam, the sabotage-minded coworker, was silenced in the face of undeniable evidence. His earlier smug confidence crumbled, replaced by awkward stammering as colleagues began to distance themselves from his bitter resentment. Mia watched their reactions, a mix of relief and sorrow sweeping over her. The betrayal and isolation she'd felt were harsh, but the truth finally pierced through the cloud of lies. It was a turning point. Proof that sometimes justice arrives not through loud proclamations, but through calm, undeniable facts. Yet, this revelation also meant she had to rebuild the trust she'd lost, a task both daunting and deeply necessary. Mrs. Patel pulled Mia aside and said something that resonated deeply. "Your integrity matters more than gossip or mistrust. People will come to see that, one by one, and I'm here to support you through that." In that moment, Mia realized that her strength wasn't just in proving innocence, but in accepting support and standing tall, despite the wounds left behind. As the community began to reconcile, a few customers who had previously turned away returned, hesitant but hopeful. The cafe started filling with laughter and shared stories once again, fragment by fragment, restoring its heartbeat. Mia's confidence, once fragile, began to solidify like stone warmed by the sun. If you ever feel overwhelmed by false accusations or the cruelty of misunderstanding, know that truth has a way of revealing itself, even when it feels buried deep. Hold on to the signs of hope around you. They may seem small, but they carry the power to change everything. Sometimes the greatest victories come silently, through evidence and quiet courage, rather than loud confrontation.